What's going on, Creation Grounds? I'm your host, Aaron Lloyd, and this is episode 39. 39, y'all. We close to 40 of the Creation Grounds. Before I get into our next guest, I just want to encourage you to like, subscribe, share with people who you think will benefit from this, gather value from it, be entertained by it, be encouraged, inspired, and all that. Our next guest is Daniel Carlton, and I met Daniel at the Negro Ensemble Company. We've done a couple shows together. Really solid dude, very artistic, poetic, and I thought it would be great to have him on. In this episode, he talks about using history as your guide for your present work and the power of knowing the black theater canon for a black actor. We talk about his experience in childhood, where he grew up, his performance and his contribution to create and share work with schools, jails, shelters, and where that desire comes from. This concept of yes and, not only in improv, but also in life as a principle and how you can use that. He talks about theater and a lot of history in this episode. Books, valuable resources for actors, black actors who want to learn more about black playwrights and work that they may have missed and not heard of before, and why it might be important to know those playwrights and those plays, and much, much more. It's a great in-depth conversation, a discourse, and discussion. And this is Daniel Carlton. Welcome to another episode of the Creation Grounds. I have brother Daniel Carlton now with me. What's up, Daniel?
How you doing, Aaron? Peace, my brother.
Peace. Where did you grow up?
That's an interesting question. I started out in Harlem during the crazy Harlem, and then my family moved upstate to Ithaca, New York, and then we migrated down south in a reverse migration to Texas. So I could say I'm probably a combination of growing up in those three places. Elementary school, New York, middle school, upstate, and then high school and part of middle school in Texas.
So you got the north and the south in you. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's probably a little bit of west, because my grandparents, we have a lot of family out west too.
Like in Cali?
Yeah.
Oh, dope. If you for your experience of childhood, if it could be written by a poet, any poet, who would you want to write it and why?
Well, if Toni Morrison was around, of course I would want her to write it, because she would make me sound like the most amazing person on the planet.
Yeah.
And I would say Langston Hughes, the same thing, if Langston Hughes was around, because he'd figure out a way to turn that into sort of a song and a monologue, and he would bring so much to it. Or even James Baldwin, because he would bring some fire and commentary to my story about what it means to be black and always moving and always having to rediscover and reinvent yourself. So those would be the three, because they would take three different approaches to it.
That's dope. And who or what has been a huge inspiration or influence on your decision to be an artist?
Three people. Hans Christian Andersen, who was what I believe is a Dutch storyteller. I saw a movie with the actor Danny Kaye when I was a kid, and Hans Christian Andersen, it was about him, and he did a thing called Thumbelina, where he was dancing with his thumb and telling stories. He was going through the countryside telling stories. And so I would begin to tell my little brother stories based on that concept, like using different parts of my body and like making my hand like a dragon, like my thumb like an airplane. So I would say that. I would say reading the autobiography of Malcolm X,
Powerful
just
book.
because it was, I was so blown away by the idea of a person who was considered to be like the bottom, and how prison and those experiences and his religious conversion and his undying love for black people, like I just thought, whatever I do in life, I gotta go that deep into it, you know. And then Langston Hughes, the poet, because he just spoke to me in so many ways, and he just simplified black life in a way that complicated it and simplified it all at the same time.
That's beautiful. And I know you do a lot of work in schools and jails and shelters. What draws you specifically to that, to work in those environments, in schools, jails, and shelters as an artist?
A few things. One is the power of what artists and people who sort of came in my path during various points in my life where I could have gone in so many other directions. As you know, I'm sure, is that as a brown black person, male, and it's same. It's for women too. It's just a different thing. I think today it might have collapsed into all of it, but I just felt like there were so many influences coming at me in different ways as I was growing up, and the people who took time to speak to me artistically and brought me like levels of storytelling and stories that spoke to me, really sort of changed my brain and sort of gave me an alternate path to look at in my brain, when I was being pulled in other directions that could tempt you into things that would be one decision that would have you doing 30 years somewhere, And so I always thought, like, as my responsibility as an artist is that I must be here for a reason, and one of those reasons is to bring high-level art to people who are used to low-level attention. And so, yeah, that's why I would do it. I think that there's so much education and entertainment and reflection that happens, and there's also I feel it's my debt, like I owe all aspects of our culture, like my time and attention and whatever abilities I have. And I also like to teach people how to tell their own stories, and so that's what attracts me to it. The other thing is that why I do that work is because when you do a commercially sort of theater, or you do things that are really involved with you as an actor, you have to be a little bit self-absorbed. You have to go into your own sort of like, I need to focus on me. And I think that is part of what builds your artistry, but it's also a thing you have to be really careful with, And so when you get out of those spaces, like, to look at your life as like more than you, because I think you have to have both in order to be a successful artist, So that's why I'm attracted to that work also,
That's beautiful. It reminds me of how I got started. Also, on a quote by Ali, he says that service is the rent that you pay for having life, essentially, or something along those lines. So that's beautiful and deep. I love that. In improv, there's this thing called yes and that you've kind of adapted or used as a model for your own life. Explain yes and what that means to you.
So in improvisation, as you know, yes and is the philosophy. Well, it's not even philosophy, it's the practice, because the philosophy is different from a practice. The practice of yes and in improv is that you take the circumstances given to you and you build on those circumstances so that you keep the story alive. And a real simple example, just in case you have any kids listening, is that if I, as the leader, say it's raining, and then you say no, it's not, then everything, it's over. It dies. Yes, and is to take that rain and say, oh wow, I forgot my umbrella. So you can still have opposition, but you're not saying no to the situation.
Right.
And I use yes and in all of my being, is that if I say yes and, so I say yes to almost everything that has to do with building. And then if I say yes, I'll say if I say yes. If I say yes to something, I'm in. And I'm not just in, I'm going to build on that thing that I'm in, so that I'm not just a passive person in that process, that I am completely in and active, which means that I have to be really careful sometimes about all the things that I take in, because everything is going to get my attention. And it's going to be that thing sometimes. And you know this thing where it's like 3 o'clock in the morning and all of a sudden you wake up because you've had some epiphany about something involved.
You need your notepad.
So I'm learning that you can't take on everything, because if you operate out of the principle of yes, everything gets the build, your attention, and it gets collapsed into what is the bigger story that we're trying to tell. And I use that in my life. What is the bigger story that I'm development in my life, not what is the beginning. I'm always interested in like what are all the paths and what are they trying to teach me. So and teaches me to pay attention and to be mindful. So that's what the and. The yes is I'm in. The and is be mindful and see what you can do to help.
And you mentioned that you use this in your work and life. What ways in your day-to-day would you say that you use yes and? Besides, I guess you kind of answered it with a project. If you get a project, then you say yes and you're just all in and committed. So I might have just answered my own question with that I had for you. But if you have anything to add to that, a yes and for that.
I mean, life for us, and I don't want to just say black people, but because right now I'm really focused on projects that in this new nowness of everything, there seems to be this real focus on like, okay, let's pay attention to black people now, and I think that in and of itself can be its own reward, and it can be its own trap, you know. And so, as a person, as a black man, I think that you have to always look at your life in the organizational aspects of it, you know, like preparation. You have to be prepared. And because you have to be prepared, within that preparation, there's always something that's going to be an improvisation within that preparation. For example, if I'm walking down the street and suddenly, you know, I get stopped by the police, you know, if I'm not already in preparation and mode, I could let that whole thing take all the art out of my whole day, life, week, month, whatever. And it can start to have an effect on everybody around me and sort of freezes me and takes me into an anger space where I'm taking it out on the people closest to me. But if I'm prepared and I'm already on an and, I'm already thinking like further ahead, and I'm thinking of what is it that I have to get back to do, you know. And so even in those moments, in the moments that challenge us, the and in the yes and is also a part of I'm prepared and I've thought these things through, and I'm not just going to be reactive, I'm going to be proactive. And so in my life, I try to be, and I don't mean this to preach, I just mean it's like some hard lessons I've learned about being proactive, that if I'm operating out of an emotional state because I'm surprised, then I'm always going to have like some emotions that I have to strip before I can get back on the path. But if I'm prepared for that, because we are human beings and we're not robots,
right?
But if I'm prepared to know that there are emotional roadblocks, then the and is like, okay, how do we maneuver through that? And so it's I think in almost every aspect of my life, from relationships, personal to parenting. I have a son who has special needs, and so I also have to always, you know, he's in his 20s, but he's probably 12, you know? And so it's all of that in our personal lives. And I have to tell you why. I lived probably my 20s, and Aaron, I'm sure you might be able to relate to this, where it's so improvisational without the and that you're just like sort of just going through
drifting,
you know, and you're in situations that if you look back, you go, oh man, like I could have handled that so much differently, you know, because I'm acting like it's new, you know, like, and I think that's part of your growth process.
Yeah.
So when I say I'm not trying to preach. I've just learned that to be proactive, to have a plan, and to proclaim that today is the day that I'm going to get it done, you know, is part of how Yes and works in my life.
Tell me about a theater piece that's impacted or resonated or landed with you the most in your life.
I'll tell you the first two, and then those first two, I guess because whatever you're introduced to sort of like sets the tone. So the first thing I was introduced to, when I was a little kid and we moved upstate, you know, there were all these young people who were coming. So this is in the '70s, so they were still coming out of that whole black power thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember watching a play, and it was by Amiri Baraka, and
The
I
Dutchman?
think it was like in the it must have been like '76 or something like that, because I was like a little kid, and all they talked about was black, like, so like the characters come out and there would be different type of people, but they would all just say black.
Just randomly? That was the line?
That was a line, like black. So it'd be like a school teacher or a person, a businessman, and they'd pass each other and go black.
That's hilarious.
In different ways, there were drums and stuff going, and I don't know, that really affected me for some reason, particularly because I was coming from Harlem to upstate, which is, Harlem is all black.
Right.
And then, or black and Latin, or black Latin, or brown. It was all brown.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you saw a white person in Harlem when I was a little kid, you almost was like, oh man, should somebody go tell them like this is Harlem? And they might be lost. Like just go help that white person out, get them out of here. But when I moved upstate, like it was so mixed that I just thought like I had been dropped into like a white world. And so when I saw that, it was like black, black. And I started writing like very young, very, very young. I was kind of a poetic prodigy when I was young because I was writing like these like little revolutionary poems.
Mm-hmm.
And it was partially because of that play. And the second black play that really affected me was A Raisin in the Sun.
Lorraine Hansberry.
Yes, and the reason it did is not even because I read the whole play, which I didn't. I had to audition for this thing, and I was probably about 13, 14, and I didn't know any plays by black people. And so I went to the library, and I asked my cousin, who was a librarian, I need a play by a black person. And all she knew was A Raisin in the Sun. And so because this was now, we're in Texas at this point, all she knew was A Raisin in the Sun. So she gave me Walter Lee, and he has this monologue where he says, like about taking the money because he wants to, like, his wife to have some pearls. Now, I was too young to even understand what any of that meant, but I did recognize the fire in it. And so I did this whole, like, deep in my voice, and I'm a man, because he says I'm a man. I'm a man! And I might look ridiculous, but it was a voice, and I thought up until that point, plays with things like musicals or plays with things that didn't really mean anything. Like, I was kind of 1 foot in the streets and 1 foot, like, I like to read, but I also like to hang, Like, I discovered liquor and cigarettes and stuff like that. And so it was the thing that pulled me into a space that I went, wow, this is kind of cool that there's a black play, and it's called A Raisin in the Sun. And I looked up the title and found out it was from a poem.
Langston Hughes.
And it just started to send me on this path, which is probably where I discovered who Woody King was. And the book, Black Drama Anthology, which changed my life completely.
Wow. And you mentioned that you were in Texas. The librarian knew one black playwright. Besides, like, kind of the location era, like where you are, we have the internet now. So what do you think are the biggest barriers of a black actor knowing more of the black theater canon? What do you think are some of those barriers?
Maybe one of the barriers is that their parents want, as a parent, you want a better life for your kids. And so you want to, in many cases, you expose them to institutions that are predominantly white in terms of, like, the history of them, their student body, but also what they consider to be the canon, what they consider to be the important works that you need to know. And so you get to these institutions and you do not get introduced to black playwrights or black creatives or black designers, you get sort of absorbed into whiteness, and because of that, even it can feel foreign, and you're trying to fit yourself into it because you think something's wrong with you. You know, because like you're really not understanding it. It's almost like the difference between Marvin Gaye and the Beach Boys, right?
Right.
So, you know,
That's a big difference, though.
you've been hearing Marvin Gaye from your parents all your life. Then you get to school, and it's the Beach Boys. That's what they've been listening to, and so they are trying to fit you into like that kind of idea. So I think that's part of the barrier. Another part of the barrier is that up until maybe 20 years ago, like you just didn't have a lot of national attention on black playwrights and black theater. You know, you may have gotten Lorraine Hansberry, possibly. No, probably, because A Raisin in the Sun is really big.
Yeah.
You probably got that. You may have gotten The Wiz. You know, like you may have seen the movie. You may have gotten a few things, but you didn't get like that funk. You didn't get that stuff that was really talking to your black self, you know? And so I think that's the biggest barrier, is that you then are being taken away from like characters or ideas that are already there, and white students have already been in a cultural space where all that stuff makes sense to them. And so now you got to make sense while you're navigating whiteness of these things that they're introducing you to. So I think that's the biggest barrier in terms of, in one aspect. The other aspect is that unless you are in a big city, you may not be exposed to seeing any black theater, you know? And so there's that, you know? I think if you live in Chicago, you live in New York, you live in St. Louis, you live in you know,
Atlanta
for sure.
Yeah.
Right. You're gonna get that. But if you live in some of the smaller, like Omaha, Nebraska, or you know, places like that, you may not get any of that. You know,
right.
You may not even see a play. But if you did, you're not gonna see a commercial with like a black cast on that. You're not gonna be able to stumble into that. You and I, Aaron, could be here in New York. It's like, hey man, you know, I got an extra ticket. You know, come see this play. I don't even know if it's going to be good, but I got to come.
Right.
Now here we are sitting in an all-black audience in a black play, you know, getting that going. And that's just not, that doesn't happen as much outside of the big cities. So I think there's that. The third thing, I think that there is still like this, I don't think it's as deep as it used to be, but I think that in American culture, because of this caste system, and I do think America's a caste system more than it is a racial system. We can talk about white is an American, almost American European like definition. And so in this white caste system where black is still like presented as something inferior, unless it's like, you know, some entertainer you really dig, you know, I think that there's still this idea that white must somehow be better. You know? And so like you're like, oh yeah, okay, I don't know why I'm supposed to read these black people, you know, I'm not supposed to learn that. I don't want to be stuck in black theater. I don't want to be, you know what I mean? Like I think there's that too. I mean, you know, if I'm just being real about it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've struggled so long to do my part for the Negro Ensemble Company, which I think is a shame that, you know, like, and I've donated money, I've donated shows, like everything I can do, because I think it's a shame. I think that without the Negro Ensemble Company and without New Federal Theater, that there would not be the level of black celebrity exposure, excellence from them getting that as a training ground. And I think there wouldn't be the canon. The only black theater you were gonna get. There are other black theater companies, but I'm speaking.
Those are the big ones, though, like that.
Yes.
I mean, New Ensemble Company has a they have a wall dedicated to them in the African American Museum in DC.
Yes.
That's the impact that theater has had.
New York being like the center of theater.
Yeah.
You know, that they were, but with that, you know, it's like I remember once, man, Aaron, being in a kind of a big room, And I was saying that I had to go down. I had to leave early because I was assistant directing something at the Neil Ensemble Company. It's a room full of black actors in a big room.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody said, "They still around?"
Wow.
And I was heated, man. I was like, damn, like, instead of making that like that statement, like, it's like, oh wow, how can I help? What they doing? I was shocked that it turned in that direction. It's like we wouldn't be in this room right now,
Right.
without that happening,
Yeah.
because am I gonna wait for the public theater? Am I gonna wait for, this one, that one? I mean, a lot of good things comes out of Chicago too. I don't want to take Chicago out of the picture because I think Chicago is the unsung city of black theater too.
Yeah.
That there's a lot of stuff that's come out of Chicago, or that has stayed in Chicago and they have their own scene. But anyway, the point is that I think that there's a lack of respect sometimes for what happens. I don't think it's as prevalent now in terms of the playwrights and the creatives,
Mm-hmm.
but there's still a lack of respect for the history and what we can do to keep those things alive now.
Yeah.
It's almost like we wish they die or something, so that, and I'm like, that's like wishing that part of your ancestry would die. And it's not dead, so let's keep it going,
Yeah. That's beautiful. What is your favorite part of or favorite moment in history? So I know you're very well read. Obviously, you grew up in like the era of like just enormous pride. What is your favorite moment in history?
That's interesting you say that, because I was an anomaly growing up, because like by the time like I was really coming of any kind of age, crack was here,
Mm-hmm.
gun violence was here, the gangs were bigger, the weapons more powerful, the prisons were filling up, and I remember like people being really annoyed with me, talking about, here he comes with all that black talk, here he comes with all that black pride, because like those people from the 60s, those were my parents, uncles, all that kind of stuff. And I personally like sat at the knee of these people because I wanted to know, but like coming up into it in an era of like materialism is what I really came into, like the real beginning of like heavy materialism around that quick hustle culture. My favorite moments in history are the times when we culturally like made big choices and everything converged, like the pride, the art, the movement, and the action. And so like one of my favorite moments in history is the founding of the Black Panther Party, and everything I've read about that. And this is how I learned about this. When I was a little kid and we moved from Harlem, I was all over the place, man.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this teacher who, she gave me this book by Bobby Seale, the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, and I didn't understand it. It had a lot of cursing in it, but she was like a hippie,
Right.
And because she was a hippie, like she didn't even realize, like I guess like that was, she just wanted to give me something black, to make me believe in myself. And I was reading this book like 8, 9, and there was a lot of cursing, but like what stuck with me was just how these black men, like weren't just about guns, but they were about self-defense.
Right.
But they were also about like pride and stuff, and I just wasn't seeing that. And so like I leaned into that, and so that probably was one of the moments in history. Another moment, which I have this play called March On, which I've written about the March on Washington, because my colleague at Blackberry Productions was very upset that the anniversary came and there wasn't a lot of attention. It was the 50th anniversary, and I don't know if I was that like versed in the March on Washington, but she just felt she couldn't write the piece, and so I went and started doing research that just took me so deep into it, watching every episode of Eyes on the Prize, the documentary, right? Getting all this footage because I didn't want to put a documentary on stage, the more I learned about it, the more respect that I had for like 250,000 people who moved to who came to Washington D.C. a single day, not knowing they were going to hear the "I Have a Dream" speech.
Right.
In one of the bloodiest years for Black people in American history. 1963, Medgar Evers was killed. 1963, those girls were killed in the church. 1963, there were bombs all over. 1963 was those iconic pictures. You see the dogs like biting people in water hoses. The Birmingham children. That was all 1963. And I'm looking at the courage of these people, and I said, wow, like that kind of changed even how I looked at the civil rights movement, because a lot of my thinking was about, you know, the more like Black Power stuff, and I realized even that. And so that would be now one of my favorite moments in history was 1963, because a year that was designed to kill all of us, the best in us. You know, Medgar Evers was killed in his driveway in front of his kids.
Sad.
It's like John Lewis. You know, they were gonna pull the plug on his speech. You know, because they thought he was gonna say something that was gonna make the crowd like erupt. Like Black people can't make a decision on ourselves, like we're just gonna spontaneously. And if we did, that would have been all right too. You know. But anyway, so that varies a lot because I use history a lot in my work.
Yeah.
A lot. Like I have a piece coming up, which is part 2 of something about the 1920s, because it's the 100th year of the Harlem Renaissance. And so I want to say that my artistic practice is that everything I write historically has to do with Black resistance, not Black passivity, because the main culture in these history books will have you believe that Black people just took it, right? They won't teach you that we made our own businesses, our own plans, that we did have resistance, that we created, that a culture that was designed to make us slaves and then had no more use for us, that we build American culture out of that. There's nothing in American culture right now that does not have a root, nothing creative that doesn't have a root in Blackness. And so my work is all about, if I'm dealing with something historical, it's all about, you know, if we're going to talk about resistance, if we're going to talk about losing, you know, like, then that means that my last breath was spent, you know, in resistance, you know. And so I try to find those moments in history where people really, you know, just on another note, I've been looking at this picture meme, and it has really upset me about there's a sign where somebody says, "I'm not my ancestors, I'll mess you up." Have you seen that?
Yeah, I've seen that one. Yep.
It is so wrong. It's like whoever is teaching you, wherever you got that from, this is why we as artists have to, like, as Black people and brown people or any people, why you have to tell your story, because a person who thinks that she's saying that as an act of resistance is a person who still doesn't know her history.
That's true. That's deep. How has understanding history guided you in your present work? You touched on this with March On. How has it guided you in your present work?
So I want to use March On again as an example. So with March On, what happened was this idea of writing a piece about the March on Washington. It's like, it's so big. So what I was doing was getting all these like historical stories, and then I had a light bulb moment. It's like, if I ask the people who were there what their experience was, I'm going to get a different, you know, instead of doing all this research, like go to the people. But what I was interested in that research is I didn't want it to be a story about Black people got to sing and march to get some rights. It's like, no, I need to find a cross-section of people who had different reasons for going. And these are the people I found. And this opened up the whole thing, right? So I met this Nambi, my partner's father. He was 17 when he went.
Wow.
Now, he, in his life, has a doctorate degree in history, right? But I mean, he was 17 coming out of Chicago. He had no idea that. I mean, you know, he just wanted to see. he wanted to see mountains.
Mountain,
He
like,
got a bus trip.
oh, that's funny.
Right. And he thought anything Martin Luther King was going to say has already been said anyway. Right?
Mm-hmm.
That was his thinking. Then I met a brother who was working like in the Bronx, and he was a little older, and he was Stephanie Barry's father, the great actress. And he went as an older, in his 20s, he was in his 20s, and he just wanted to he needed to believe, like, in hope. He needed to believe that something was possible, right? Because he was a little bit older, and so he had dealt with, like, a lot of that North racism, disappointments, dreams deferred. Then I met this white woman, and I interviewed her, and she was an interesting story. She had been watching the movement on TV and felt helpless. And so, from Massachusetts, and her friends felt that if she was to go, she better hook up with somebody who was a little bit more hip. So they introduced her to this guy on his bus, to ride the bus to Washington. They hung out all day. And short story is, they fell in love during that march, and they were married for like 50 years.
Wow.
Before he died. 17-year-old Don went to the march, complained the whole time, and then all of a sudden it started to click in. Mahalia Jackson sang. That was his mother's favorite singer, right? All of a sudden, he started looking at it bigger than himself. The other guy, Carl, he started like becoming part of the crowd. This woman, everybody. So then I said, well, this is amazing, and they didn't know each other. So now I got to have some opposition. So I created two reporters. One, a white reporter who had no idea what he was doing. And so he was going to look at chaos. Because that's how we were presenting it in all my research. Like, it's going to be a mess. It's going to be chaos. Then I had a black reporter who was so busy in the field that there was no way that he could even make it to the march because a lot of stuff was still going on, right? And then I put them and then set it all and said, nope, you got to put this music in. And I thought about all the music that black people love that motivated them through these marches, right? So suddenly you got the music, and I had to ask people, like, my mother, even people's grandparents, like, what was the sound? What were you doing in 63? What was the sounds? So now I got the music. Now I got these stories. Now I got them from sun up to sundown, and we end on the speech, but we don't completely hear it because it was not about Dr. King. It was about people needing to love, believe, and use that art, use their stories. You know what I mean? So that's how, like, I used history, but history itself is like, it's dry because it's already happened, right?
Right.
And so not all you're going to get is pictures unless you get the people who had the experiences,
Facts.
And they're going to teach you more about that than anybody who's written a book about it,
It's true.
And so I apply that to other aspects of my art when I can, when it's dealing with history. I try to find sources, and then I try to meet it where it was culturally. And then I ask myself, what was the resistance? Not from, like, the white area of it, but what was black resistance? Like,
Yeah.
And what would be, and I'll tell you, man, you never know. And then I'll stop here because I'm caffeinated, so I'm talking. I'll give you another example of how history, you got to be, Benja, you've been educated.
Yep.
So about 6 months ago, I got a call from the New York Times. And they were doing a article on a woman named Pigfoot Mary, who was a Harlem entrepreneur in the 20s. So Benja Kay originally asked me to write a play about Pigfoot Mary because she wanted to play her. And I tried to do some research. I could only find a paragraph. So I had to write a whole piece around this paragraph.
Wow.
Right? And all the history. And so I made all these characters who at that time would have come in contact with her. Because my thinking was she would have met everybody because she sold food. It was like a first food truck, really. She sold that on the corner of 135th and Lenox. So that means she met everybody, the whole Harlem Renaissance, right? And anyway, so within this story, I wrote it, we did it, we toured it for a while. Actually, I gave this show to NEC as one of the touring shows. And 6 months ago, I get a call from the New York Times to ask if they could interview me about Pigfoot Mary. And the first question they asked me was, do you have any pictures of her? And I said, no. And I've never seen a picture of her.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, we haven't either. And so if you do a Google search,
Mm-hmm.
the only picture of Pigfoot Mary is Benja Kane.
That's hilarious. That's funny. Did they use her for the article? That's funny.
There's no other pictures.
That's hilarious.
And in the article, they asked me questions about, like, how did you come up with this material? And it was like, sometimes you got to write around it.
Right.
You got to just position that character in a space. But yeah, so Google search Pigfoot Mary and see what comes up.
I'm doing that right after this interview. That's hilarious. And I'm gonna text her too. I'm gonna text her the picture. And be like, I didn't know you was Pigfoot to Mary. That's funny.
Yeah, got her with a big old tub where she put the food.
That's funny.
Yeah, so that's how history. Like, I always try to find those spaces, where we can elevate it and we can make it land on like contemporary ears. I think that's important too.
What would you say your top 5 black plays are?
I would say Raisin in the Sun because it introduced me to it. I would say Zoom Man in the Sign by Charles Fuller, who, as you know, also wrote Soldier's Play.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, and I never pronounce this right, but I'm going to get it right, Odudu or Odu, and it was a play presented by the New Ensemble Company. It was sort of our great beloved Charles Walden was in that.
Mm-hmm.
Home by Sam Art Williams. First Breeze of Summer by Leslie Lee, and these are all New Ensemble Company plays.
Yeah.
Right. These plays have had a profound effect on me. Now, I would also say there are moments in some Susan Laurie Parks plays that are very moving, but I don't understand the totality of them sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
I actually did a Susan Laurie Parks play in South Africa once, the Venus play, which is about a South African protagonist. Protagonist, wrong word. You know the story, right?
Yeah. I'm still on that. You went to South Africa for work. That sounds incredible.
Well, what was interesting, I've been very fortunate, man. I've probably worked in about, I guess, 32 countries at this point.
Wow.
So I always consider myself the person who is not, like, famous or a celebrity, but I think in some ways it's worked in my favor because I've been able to really do a lot of stuff that probably people wouldn't have thought that they could ask me to do if I was, like, a celebrity. Like, to ask somebody to go to South Africa for 4 months is like, you're not going to ask Will Smith to do that.
Right.
Unless it's a movie,
Speaking of, yeah.
That project. Oh, so the Venus play, this is where I would say Susan Laurie Parks, there are moments. Because I love what I was doing as the character, the Negro Resurrectionist. But the South African people, they were going, we don't understand this play. And it was supposed to be set. Like,
In South Africa. That's funny.
Here's a funny story about that, too. It's like, I guess we can say it now because she didn't want us to talk about it then. But the producer was having problems raising money because we won this grant.
Mm-hmm.
And then something happened politically, I don't know. And Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith's production company paid for us to so that we could get there. And their whole thing was like, don't use our names. Not because we don't want to support it. It's because we don't want people to, like, confuse what's going on. We want this to be about what y'all are doing. And I thought that was really beautiful,
That is. What would you say the top 5 black movies are for you?
Coolie High.
Coolie High is a good one.
Yes. There's a movie, Superfly. We laugh about this, but I love Superfly.
It's a good movie.
It is a good movie. And it says a lot about, those times, right? I actually love that period, by the way, like those so-called black exploitation films.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you can get past the costumes and you can get past, like, what you think is like the corny aspects of it, a lot of those movies had strong empowerment themes in them. You know, like Trouble Man, which starred Robert Hooks. You know? Like if you get past all that, so I would say The Wiz. Not because I think it's better than The Wizard of Oz, but it was like I loved the take on it, and I was in Texas, so I didn't see it play, you know.
Right.
And so the movie, The Wiz, Eve's Bayou. I loved Eve's Bayou. I thought that was like
It's a classic. Yeah, it is.
It was almost like a Toni Morrison novel, like come to life, you know.
Yeah.
Did I name 5?
Yeah, I think so. You said Cooley High. You said The Wiz. You said Eve's Bayou. That's 3. You said Superfly. That's 4. So you might actually. There's one more. One more you got.
So I want to use that. There was a movie, and it was sort of like in this New Jack City kind of like vibe, but I thought it was way better. It was called Sugar Hill. Did you see that movie?
I actually haven't. No.
It was also with Wesley Snipes. Was it with Wesley Snipes?
Sugar Hill.
Sugar Hill was an amazing movie about that same kind of era, you know, as the New Jack City. I also love, what is this, End of Nowhere? Is that the name of it?
End of Nowhere. Who's an actor or director? End of Nowhere. So it's recent.
Yeah, it's very recent. It's so beautiful.
End of Nowhere.
Yeah.
It's a documentary or a movie?
It's a movie. Now, if you guys about the documentary, man, I would. Oh, Do the Right Thing.
Oh yeah,
How
yeah.
could I forget Do the Right Thing and Malcolm X?
Yep.
I mean, you know, Spike. You can start listing Spike, and although I'm mixed about Spike Lee movies, I think some of them are brilliant, and some of them are like, damn, you really got over that one. But if you ever want to understand Katrina, you know, like his Katrina documentary, have you seen it?
Who, Spikes?
Yeah.
No.
Oh man, like be ready, be like fortified, because he went to Katrina right after it happened, and he got the story with that documentary.
Wow.
If the Creek Don't Rise.
I gotta check it out.
Yes. Spike, that documentary was everything, man.
Wow.
Yeah. And I would say to your listeners, like a lot of the Spike Lee documentaries are excellent. 4 Little Girls, you know. The Katrina one.
I saw the 4 Little Girls one. I saw that one. I saw the 4 Little Girls one. I didn't see the Katrina one though. I'll check it out. What book have you gifted the most in the past year?
It's called The Famished Road, and the author is African. His name is Ben Okri. I think it's Okri. It's a book it's a really big book, so you really have to invest in it. And I have probably bought about 5 copies of it, because what happens is I used to loan it, and then it would take so long to get it back. And so I just bought copies and said for people that I really want, I wrote in like the front cover, like as soon as you finish this, pass it to somebody else.
Oh.
Right? So I've done that like 4 times. So it's circulating like that particular book, and then the 5th copy I keep for myself.
That's dope.
I haven't seen that in a while, so maybe I can loan that out too.
What are you currently working on or desire to work on next?
A couple of things. I'm working on part 2 of a piece for Harlem Stage. The first part was called Check Your Invite, and it's based on Langston Hughes' house party invitations. And part 2 is I'm going to do it because we're in, Zoom now, or whatever we're going to use. I'm going to do it as a radio play. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to do it as a radio play, and then as the commercials, like fake commercials, you're going to see like me manipulating all the sounds
That's cool.
So that's coming up in November. I have a couple of things. I'm working on a project also around the Harlem Renaissance where I have an answer to art from the Harlem Renaissance, and I have poetic responses so I take the piece, I give it a poem from the period, and it's going to be, I think, 70 years of art created by Harlem artists, and that's at Columbia, and so I'm writing the poetry for it.
So it's like an anthology of poems representing those 70 years, or is it just like
70 years, like 70 years.
Yeah. Wow.
So the poems would be like performance poems.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, you'll see Aaron Douglas painting,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a poem as the response to that painting. So I'm going to have a poem that was written during that time, and I'm going to double respond. I'm going to respond to the poem and respond to the work of art. So it'll be like this, like, I call it triple consciousness. Like, what would a 21st century person, how would they, and so that'll be, we're going to film that at the gallery at Columbia, at the Eli Wallach Gallery, and it'll be broadcast.
Wow.
And I'm going to also get some young poets, and I'm looking for an elder to also to participate. So that's that. And I have some pieces that are for younger audiences that I'm working on. One is we're trying to, Nambi, my partner, and I, by the way, Native Son by Nambi is also one of my favorite plays.
Mm-hmm.
Nambi Kelly. So we're also working on a couple of things too, like that we can't announce yet, but once the ink is dry, as they say.
I understand.
Yeah, and then some wild stuff. Like, I am still trying. I don't know what's gonna happen, but I started working on a musical about a year ago, based on Langston Hughes and Zora Neale's relationship, and I don't know when that's gonna happen. I don't want to do it on these Zoom platforms. I just think it has to happen with people because I need amens and childs and you go girl.
Uh-huh.
And, oh shit!
You need that audience.
All that. I need the actors to hear all that because it's really dramatic and juicy and musical.
Yeah.
I want to hear people's hands clapping.
I understand. I ask all my guests this. When you think of the word creative, who's the first person that comes to mind for you and why?
Richard Wright. Richard Wright just automatically comes to me. I think you know this about me, your listeners don't, is that one of my areas besides playwriting, acting, and directing is I also write poetry, but the poetry that I write is really based on, I stumbled into Richard Wright's haiku, like Black Boy, Native Son. If I turn this thing around, you saw all the novels and all the work by Richard Wright just on the bookshelf in front of me, and you'd be like, wow, really into Richard Wright. But I didn't know he wrote haiku, and he was writing them because he was dying, and he just needed, like, to write short form.
Wow.
And I got interested in that, and so every day I write a daily haiku, and not just to pay homage to him, but because he taught me about short form. And so when I think about creative, I think about a person who, even when they have their last, they just figure another way out to just
do it. That's incredible. Where can people connect with you? Where can people read your works, find your works, and just find everything about you? Or connect if they want to, like if an actor wants to connect or a writer wants to connect to learn, where would they connect with you?
They can go to my website, danielcarlton.com. Now, my website is a little janky, but it's there.
Okay.
And I say it's janky because I really need to declutter it a little bit. But you can. And also, just my email, danielcarlton@gmail. I don't always answer stuff right away, but I can't sleep until I deal with every single email I get. So just be mindful of that if you email me. He's going to answer, but it's going to keep him up at night too.
Wow. Daniel Carlton, it's been a pleasure, man.